Alright, the next step in the restoration of my 1979 Jeep CJ7 is to rebuild this Dana 300 transfer case. My 79 Jeep CJ7 came with a Dana 20, but I sold that when I sold the engine out of it, and I picked this up. I actually found it on Facebook Marketplace, but it's in very good shape. But while this thing's out, it might as well rebuild it. You know, you can buy I bought the complete rebuild kit, and I've downloaded the service guide, so it tells you kind of exactly how to do it. What's interesting about this particular, let me get you familiar a little bit with this particular transfer case. This is from a 1980 year model CJ. It's either CJ5, 7, or 8 Scrambler. And the reason I know that is because on the back side, this is the rear output shaft, and it's got this shorter tail section. The shorter tail section was only offered in 1980. After that, they put a little bit longer tail section. It's about 1.5 inches type longer, whatever. And what's happening is a lot of people that are doing these LS swaps into these old CJ Jeeps is because the transmission's a little bit longer. This transfer case, I believe, is a little bit further back, and it's got such a short drive shaft anyway, is they're actually, you know, getting rid of the long tail shaft and going and buying an aftermarket tail shaft, which is shorter. But if I can buy the tail shaft, I mean, this whole unit was like $250 versus buying this with the longer for tail of $250, and that aftermarket tail shaft is $400 or something like that. You'd have $650 just in the bare bones. So anyway, I took my time. I've got plenty of time. Found this particular one on Facebook Marketplace and basically sourced it there. It's in fantastic condition, kind of ready to go. But we're going to put a rebuild kit in it. The only, other than the rebuild kit, which is all your bearings and seals, it also comes with you know, a new shaft. I'm gonna go over. I'm gonna show you. We're gonna open up that kit and show you all the details. But it's gonna basically restore all the kind of wearable parts in this. The only other upgrade that I'm gonna do is on this rear output shaft. This rear yoke, I'm gonna change it out to one that'll support a double cart and a rear drive shaft. By doing that, that's going to help on that pretty steep drive angle, because I am going to do about a 2.5 inch lift on the Jeep. So anyway, this will get swapped out to one that supports double cart. This one I'll continue to use it because we're going to use just a stock style drive shaft. I'll probably actually buy a new one that's maybe a little bit heavier duty. So we'll have that in there. So let me do, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the rebuild kit, just going to show you what's in that rebuild kit. We'll kind of open up some of the packages and go through that. Okay, this is the Crown D300-MASKIT kit, and it comes with, you know, all new bearings and races. And are these Timken? Yeah, these are Timken races, so Timken bearings. This is good quality stuff. You got several bearings and race sets. This is a pilot bearing that goes between where the input shaft and that rear output shaft come. That the input shaft rests on that. It comes with, this is that idler shaft, all new roller bearings, and looks like a spacer there. So that'll be good to have all that replaced. Here are all the new seals. Various seals, some shim pack, some gaskets. And I think the neatest thing about this kit, and I think I saw some kits that didn't have it, this is that intermediate shaft. This goes along with these new roller bearings. This shaft is part of a bearing. It's the inner portion of a bearing, so this is wearable. It potentially gets a lot of wear. It's neat that this kit actually included this. Some kits do not include this. Here's actually an O-ring. It'll go on the end of that. It gets hammered in, but I'm glad to know that we got that, as well as on your shift forks. These are the pads for those shift forks, so it's good. I don't think every kit comes with those, so really tickled that this kit did with that. So I'm pretty sure this kit's going to have everything I need to do my rebuild. So let me, what I'm going to do now is I want to show you some of the documentation that I've gathered together and I'm going to follow for my build. All right, I'm going to give you a brief look at basically the documentation that I've gathered. Basically, it's just the service manual for the transfer case. And in section 2D, it actually covers the 208 transfer case, the 219 Quadra-Track, and then finally the Model 300. And the first 5 or 6 pages of this section had some pretty good information, so I was able to just highlight and look at some of the shifters for the different pieces, because my shifter is not totally complete. I'm going to have to actually come up with some of these parts. But I kept those first couple of pages because it does retain to the Dana 300, and then here's where it starts the 2.8, so I crossed that out. I then took out probably 20-25 pages that uncovered those other two transfer case, and here's where that ended, and here starts the Dana 300 transfer case. And one of the probably the neat things, you know, I've read through this several times, but one of the things I did is actually marked up this document. Here's a nice overview of the kind of the inside of the transfer case. Again, it's kind of upside down. Here's the input shaft. It goes into that pilot bearing. Here's the output shaft for the rear. Here's the intermediate shaft, and then here's that front drive shaft that goes up the passenger side. We're going to see those very detailed here in a little bit, but it basically, we're going to come up to right here is an exploded view diagram. It's got all the parts are numbered, and it's got the names of what they are, and it's kind of critical that you kind of understand, you know, some of these names and the parts, because what happens is in the actual disassembly and restoration portion of this, they reference all those names. So I went through, and actually when they talk about removing the output drive shaft clutch sleeve, that's part number 38 on this diagram. I went ahead and put numbers to all of these items that they're talking about, just so I could really quickly reference back the diagram and know what I'm taking apart. So what I'll end up doing is this is a PDF document that I downloaded. I'm gonna go in there and I'm gonna take out those pages that didn't reference the Dana 300, and I'll put together a PDF that you can download for free. There'll be a link in the description below where you can download basically kind of a copy of this document that I've taken out some of the stuff that you don't need, and I'll see if there's also a way that I can actually incorporate putting these numbers in that document as well. That way you could just download it, print it out, and you've got the same kind of reference that I have. Now, there are a couple other videos on YouTube that talk about, you know, restoring the Dana 300. Interestingly, they don't follow these steps. I'm going to try and follow these steps as far as an order of events, just so we have written documentation of what we're doing, plus now this video evidence of kind of what we did. So with all that said, I think it's time to start getting our hands dirty. All right, so as we're going to follow the instructions, interestingly, the instructions don't include, and even the exploded diagram does not include these two items, as well as the actual Speedo piece that's over here on the tail shaft. They're not even mentioned there, and I know that we want to take these out so we don't break them. This has got a tab that sticks up, and we're going to do a lot of it where this thing's going to be upside down on this surface, and I don't want to break this. So I want to get these two items out. This is the four-wheel drive switch. When the shifters are in four-wheel drive, this thing basically has continuity. It sends a ground to a light that shows and indicates that you're in four-wheel drive. And this is just a blank cap. It's not being used. Underneath this, it would be potentially where a detent is, but there's nothing under here. So we're going to take these two items out, and then I'm going to spin it around, show you where we're going to take out the Speedo. So here's that little four-wheel drive switch. It's just a little button here. When that shift rail, basically it's in a position where it's in four-wheel drive, it'll depress this button and give you continuity on this little tab there. So there's that piece. And then this guy you want to be careful with. This is actually just an aluminum cap. Why they would do this, I don't know, but that's just a pure piece of aluminum, and there's really nothing in there. Here's an O-ring. Let's keep that together. And then just to show you, I've got over here, I've got a little storage compartment. As I take things apart, I put them in order so I know what kind of came out in what order. And it keeps like things apart. You know, when I take 6 nuts off or 6 bolts off of one of these items, I'm going to put all those in one thing so I know they come to. There are people that put all the nuts and bolts in one can, and I don't know how they know what goes where. But okay, the other thing I want to take off before we start tearing this thing apart is on the back side. Here is the Speedo gear, which is down inside here, and this has got to come off. This is a 7/8" socket, 7/8" hex. And I bought a 7/8" socket, and unfortunately there's a little sleeve right here that's not going to allow this socket to go on there. Now I bought this on Amazon, knowing that it probably was not going to make it very good fitting. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually kind of grind this down to thin down this thing just enough where it'll slip down in there and allow us to take this off. So let's do a little grinding on this thing real quick. Okay, so with a bench grinder, I just took off a little bit here. I took it off really slowly. I didn't want to overheat the wrench, but it still left a whole bunch of meat on there. So we still got a bunch of strength, but now this thing will slip down in that little section and we can get that out. All right, the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to take off this bottom cover. And to do that, we're going to flip it over and lay it on this side right here. So let's do that real quick. I wish I knew how much this thing weighed. Just to orientate you again, here's our input shaft. Opposite of that's our rear output shaft. And here's our front output shaft. And now we're going to focus on getting these. Okay, let's get all these off and get this pried up. Ugh. There's some sludge in there. Alright, next we're going to get these yokes off. I wish I had a big pipe clamp to get on here. I got this woodworking clamp. I believe I got it cinched down there tight enough that it will do what I need it to do. It won't rotate, but let's just see what we can get if we can break it loose. Notice I'm not even using the clamp part of it. I'm just want to get these flats of this thing on the flats of this yoke, and that's going to be enough to hold it. That right there should, okay, hold that right there. Oh, look at that, it just pulls right off. Now this is the forward one, and this is the one we're going to keep. And so I'm going to put a little punch on it. The one with the little dot on it, notice the front one we'll use that back on, and it's the back side one we're actually discard. So. So this one wouldn't come out with a hammer, so we're going to use this large bearing separator, and it should just walk it right out. Yeah, I can see it moving. Yeah, it's coming out now. Alright, next we're going to take off this input shaft support. These are Torx, and I found a Torx, a T27 is what fits it best. So, and I'm going to break them loose by hand, and then we'll get them out the rest of the way with, I just want to break them loose because they're going to have some thread sealer on there. I just don't want to just wrench on them really hard with the impact. It's just slowly coming out. I don't want to force it. You get unnecessary scratches on it. There you go. All right, so that's the input shaft and this gear come out as an assembly. All right, the next thing they want us to do is remove a clutch sleeve that's in here, but there's the clutch fork is still attached to it, so there's really no way to do that. So we'll just make a note of that, and that'll come out very easily a little later. But there's no really way to get that out, no real sense in doing that now. They do want us, we are going to actually disassemble this whole input shaft now. The funny thing is they don't then have you reassemble it until later. We're going to work on this as a unit. We're going to disassemble it and then reassemble it and get it back to this state with all new bearings. So let me get you the camera moved over. We're going to set up so we can see what I do to take this apart. Alright, that comes off. Alright, so that gear's not sliding off, so I'm going to try and tap it. It feels like it's moving. Yes, I know. Okay. Now, when I did the transmission, I kind of made a rule of thumb. When you take something off, I always put it, the side that came off first, put it down. So when we start storing this stuff, it'll be upside down, so it goes back on this way. That way the next thing you pick on, you can take off and put on there as well. So the next thing I want to do is remove this little ring right here. It's got a little screw. Okay. And now we got a bearing in here. We want to get this bearing out. And I don't think it's in there. Yeah, it's already moved out. Okay. So there's that housing and this bearing. Now that may need to be pressed off. So in the instructions it does say you're going to have to press this bearing off. So I've installed a bearing separator on here, and I'm going to move this over now to my press. I got a hydraulic press. We're going to press this bearing off. Okay, that wasn't very hard to press off. So we got this bearing out. It doesn't really matter, but the writing is up. And so just again, on my table, I'm going to take this and set it face down. Okay, so we put our bearing on upside down over here. And then the last thing is there is a shim. And you got to make sure you don't forget this or lose this. This will come off. And I'm going to just set it here. I'm going to set it a little bit off to the side to remember. That's going to go back on. And it's my understanding, here's the new bearing that's going to go on, that these bearings are made to such high tolerances that whatever the shim was that made this whole assembly work with that case, that shim should be the right end play. And we'll end up just putting this shim back in, and we'll test for end play, make sure everything's all fine. But typically people are basically be able to put the shims back in that came out. And with the bearing, and this bearing basically matches exactly what that the specs for that bearing as far as width. This bearing is just a touch different. It does have a little recess right here for a clip, which just doesn't get used. And this inner piece on the outside is just a touch different. But you know, the size-wise is the same. And you know, in this installation purpose, this little recess is not going to be used. But this will go back on here in a minute. The very last thing we're going to do is for disassembly of this input shaft is get this seal out. And then again, before we move on, I am going to reverse this and get this all reassembled, because I remember how it goes back together. So let me get this little seal out.
Okay, we got that cleaned up. I used like 4/0 steel wool and just cleaned up that surface. It's just smooth as butter. Here's the new seal. Got the spring. It's a spring-loaded seal. We'll end up putting some grease on the back side of this. Make sure that spring doesn't come out. And again, this green tape here, it's actually paint. It's kind of used to help really create a seal on this outside as well. So we're just going to set that guy on there. And try and get it pushed down kind of even here. Okay, with the seal installed. And now we're going to come back to this. We're going to put our shim back on. And then this bearing. Again, there's really not a top side or bottom side. I'm going to just put that where, about right there. And we're going to press this on. Press it all the way down to that shim. Alright, before we put this shaft back in here, I'm going to put a little bit of grease on the back side of this seal where that spring is. Just not a lot, just enough to kind of hold that. Now, there you can see down in there, we're just kind of packed on the back side of that. Now this is going to work its way in here. Get those 2x4s back. Okay, there's that. And here's our gear. Remember we took it, we're going to flip it over like that. Yeah, it's going to slide back on. Yeah. Oop, there it goes, snap right in. Okay, so there is the input shaft assembly. It's been taken apart, new bearings, new seal, and it's been put back together. So we're going to be able to take this section here and just put it off to the side, and then we'll continue working on the rest of the item.
Jack it up.